Do you know that giants once walked the earth? Yes, there is proof that skeletal remains of beings measuring over 8 feet tall have been discovered across America. Of all the archaeological mysteries trying to uncover humanity's true past, this is one of the most suppressed. Also, it seems the most documented. Many years ago, newspapers across the United States reported the discovery of giant human skeletons, and it looks like these beings weren't just tall humans, they were something entirely different. What are these Nephilim giants? What proof did archaeologists find to claim they once ruled the earth? Is it possible that we share genes with this mysterious race? We will find out together in this new episode of Forbidden Chronicles. Welcome. In the 19th century, hot whispers about a strange discovery began to make rounds. This discovery challenged everything that historians believed about human origins, because this time it was not about ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, nor was it about early humans. It was about beings of enormous size that came before modern civilization, giants. And it all started with newspaper reports flooding American media. From 1850 to 1920, local newspapers across the United States published hundreds of reports about giant skeletons being unearthed. These weren't tabloid sensations. These were legitimate archaeological findings reported by town officials, museum curators, and scientific institutions. Let's look at some examples. In 1897, the New York Times reported the discovery in Antrim County, Michigan, of skeletons measuring between 7 and 9 feet tall. The article described skulls with double rows of teeth, a feature never seen in modern humans. In 1911, miners working in Lovelock Cave, Nevada, discovered mummified remains of red-haired individuals measuring over 8 feet tall. The local Paiute tribe had oral traditions about these beings. They called them the Sitaka, describing them as cannibalistic giants who warred with their ancestors. In 1913, Dr. Ralph Glidden excavated dozens of skeletons on Catalina Island, California. He found remains ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall. He photographed them. Those photographs still exist today. But here's where it gets interesting. According to researchers who have studied these historical accounts, the Smithsonian Institution allegedly collected many of these skeletal remains. However, his ideology was too radical to pursue. When independent researchers requested to examine these bones, they were told the remains had been lost, misplaced, or destroyed. And if giant skeletons did exist in such quantities, where are they now? Where is the proof of their existence? Because modern museums lacked these bones on display, the whispers of giants were soon swept under the carpet. This was until researchers discovered something remarkable. The Bible had been talking about these beings all along. Suddenly, the dismissed reports rose to the surface again. Why? Because the Bible didn't just mention giants casually. It had detailed records. In Genesis chapter 6, one of the most mysterious passages in all of Scripture appears. It reads, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose." The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. In this passage, the Bible tells a tale that mesmerized theologians for thousands of years. With this testimony, questions about who these Nephilim were flooded religious communities page after page. According to the text, the Nephilim appeared when sons of God took human women as wives. But who were these sons of God? That fateful passage has sparked endless debate. Some scholars say they were fallen angels. Others argue they were the descendants of Seth, Adam's third son. But the text itself doesn't clarify. What it does clarify is this: the offspring were called Nephilim. The Hebrew word Nephilim comes from Nephil, meaning to fall. These were the fallen ones. And the passage describes them as heroes of old, men of renown. According to the Bible, the Nephilim were not ordinary humans. They were extraordinary beings who existed before the Great Flood. But that was not all. The Bible was not ready to let humanity forget these giants so easily. The Nephilim appear again after the flood. In Numbers 13:33, when Israelite spies scout the land of Canaan, they report, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Grasshoppers, think about that description. These weren't just tall individuals. According to the biblical account, they were so massive that grown men felt like insects in comparison. But the biblical story on the Nephilim kicks off with far more detail in a controversial ancient text. a text that was once part of early Christian scripture, but was later removed. That text is the Book of Enoch, and it reveals something unspeakable. The Book of Enoch was a sacred text in early Christianity. Church fathers like Tertullian quoted from it. The New Testament Book of Jude references it directly, yet most modern Bibles don't include it. Why was it removed? Perhaps because of what it reveals about the Nephilim's origins. According to the Book of Enoch, the story begins with 200 angelic beings called Watchers. These Watchers were assigned to observe humanity, but something went terribly wrong. The text describes how these Watchers descended to Mount Hermon and made a pact. They would take human women as wives and have children. The leader of this rebellion was named Semyaza, and he convinced the other Watchers to join him. But the Book of Enoch was interested in revealing more than just this forbidden union. It described the consequences in disturbing detail. When the Watchers mated with human women, the offspring were the Nephilim, and Enoch writes that these beings grew to enormous size. Some translations describe them as reaching 3,000 ells in height, while scholars believe this was likely exaggerated over centuries of oral tradition. Even conservative estimates suggest these beings were 15 to 20 feet tall. But their size wasn't the only problem. The Watchers also taught humanity forbidden knowledge. One Watcher named Azazel taught men to forge weapons of war. Another taught sorcery and enchantments. Others revealed the secrets of astronomy, meteorology, and divination. This seemed like a good exchange at first, advanced knowledge in return for coexistence. And once this exchange was settled, humanity began a rapid technological and spiritual advancement that should not have been possible for their era. When the Nephilim fully matured, Enoch wrote, they began to consume all the resources of humanity. And when resources became scarce, they turned violent. The text describes how they began to sin against birds, beasts, and fish. They even consumed one another. The earth, according to the Book of Enoch, was being corrupted at a fundamental level, and this is where the biblical narrative connects. Genesis 6:5-7 explains why God sent the flood. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The flood, according to this ancient account, was sent to cleanse the earth of this corruption. But that was not all. The story doesn't end with the flood. But as you may already know, the biblical account includes a troubling detail. Genesis 6:2-4 says the Nephilim were on earth in those days and also afterward, after the flood. So the questions kept coming in. If the flood was meant to destroy the Nephilim and cleanse the earth, why do giants keep appearing in biblical accounts after the flood? Where did they come from? The Bible's response is staggering. It mentions multiple groups of giants that existed post-flood. The Rephaim Deuteronomy 3:11 describes King Og of Bashan, whose bed was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. This suggests Og himself was likely 10 to 12 feet tall. The Anakim Numbers 13 describes these as the descendants of the Nephilim. The Israelite spies who saw them doubted they could conquer the promised land because of their size. Goliath of Gath, the most famous giant, 1 Samuel 17:4, describes him as 6 cubits and a span, approximately 9 feet 9 inches tall. But 2 Samuel 21 reveals he wasn't alone. It mentions other giants, Ishbi-Banob, Seth, and a man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Wait, what? We were just as shocked. So if the flood wiped out the Nephilim, how did these post-flood giants exist? This brings us to several theories. Theory 1. The corrupted bloodline. Some scholars suggest that Noah's sons carried the Nephilim gene. Genesis 9 contains the strange story of Ham and his son Canaan being cursed. Could this curse be related to genetic corruption? Theory 2. The Watchers returned. A more controversial theory suggests that after the flood, the Watchers descended again and created a second generation of giants. But let's move forward to the big question. If giants truly existed, where is the physical evidence? In the Pacific, I mean, across the United States. You heard that right. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, giant skeletal remains were discovered in locations spanning from Nevada to Ohio, from Michigan to California. Let's examine the most compelling cases. Lovelock Cave, Nevada, 1911. Miners discovered red-haired mummies between 8 and 10 feet tall. The local Paiute tribe confirmed their oral tradition about red-haired giants they called Death Valley, California, 1931. Dr. F. Bruce Russell claimed to have found a hidden city containing mummies up to 9 feet tall. Glenrose, Texas, 1930. Human footprints measuring 21.5 inches long were found alongside dinosaur tracks in the Paluxy River. Not only were these discoveries spread across such vast geography, but they were reported by credible sources. It was deduced by local newspapers, scientific journals, and museum records that these discoveries were legitimate. But it also begs the question, what happened to all these bones? Aside from the newspaper reports, researchers claim that the Smithsonian Institution systematically collected and destroyed giant skeleton evidence. This was the researchers' primary concern. According to researchers who have investigated this claim, when the Smithsonian was contacted about these remains, they either denied having them or claimed they were misidentified. In 2014, stories circulated about a Supreme Court case where the Smithsonian allegedly admitted to destroying thousands of giant skeletal remains in the early 1900s to protect the mainstream chronology of human evolution. However, fact-checkers later identified this as a hoax story. The Smithsonian issued a statement denying they ever possessed or destroyed giant remains. So where does this leave us? What started as hundreds of newspaper reports with credible sources soon became a he said, she said situation between researchers and institutions. But the more researchers explained, the more evidence began to surface from other parts of the world. If giant remains were truly just misidentifications or hoaxes, why do similar discoveries keep appearing globally? Could there be truth hidden away? Or are researchers seeing patterns where none exist? Before you believe the latter, hold on. When everyone least expected it, more testimonies about giants began to surface. Peru, 2016. 3-fingered mummies with elongated skulls were discovered in Nazca. DNA testing revealed unknown genetic markers. Mainstream science dismissed them as hoaxes, but independent researchers argued the evidence warrants further investigation. Ecuador, 1964. Father Carlos Vaca discovered giant bones in a cave. One femur, if proportional, would belong to a being over 25 feet tall. The bones were handed to authorities and vanished. Romania, 1940. Soviet soldiers allegedly found giant skeletal remains in a secret chamber. The remains were confiscated and never seen again. Do you know that there is a pattern here? Imagine discovering giant remains, reporting them to authorities, and watching them disappear. This was the pattern that kept repeating. This led many to wonder, what if institutions are deliberately suppressing this evidence? If giants never existed, proving it should be simple, but they won't release the evidence. They never do. But the ancient stones were not the only proof researchers had. When it comes to proof of giants' existence, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Do you know that every culture on Earth has giant legends? Yes, from Greece to Japan, from Norse mythology to Native American traditions, the story repeats itself. Greek mythology, the Titans before the Olympian gods. The Titans ruled. They were beings of enormous size who warred with the gods. Norse mythology, the Jotun, the frost giants existed before the gods. They were massive, powerful beings who challenged divine authority. Hindu texts, the Daityas, ancient Hindu scriptures describe races of giants who warred with the gods. The Mahabharata mentions beings of enormous size with supernatural abilities. Native American legends, the Paiute, tell of the Seetuka. The Aztecs spoke of the Quinamitsin. Cherokee legends described the Tall Ones. Across both continents, indigenous tribes have detailed oral histories about giants. Japanese mythology, the Oni ancient texts describe giant demon-like beings who terrorized early human settlements. Celtic legends, the Fomorians' Irish mythology, speaks of a race of giants who inhabited Ireland before other civilizations arrived. This leads us right back to the central question. If these were just myths, why do cultures separated by oceans tell almost identical stories? Think about it. How else could civilizations with no contact with each other develop the same legends unless they were describing real events? Anthropologists argue these myths arose independently because early humans found large bones, probably dinosaur fossils, and created stories to explain them. But this explanation has a problem. The stories are too consistent. They all describe beings of enormous-sized giants who came before humans or early in human history. Conflicts between giants and either gods or early humans, the eventual defeat or disappearance of the giants. What if these aren't myths? What if they're cultural memories of real beings? Before we discuss whether giants were human or something more, You need to see further proof that will make you give the giant hypothesis some extra points on your board. Aside from the skeletal remains and the global legends, massive ancient structures might hold clues to these beings. How do you explain structures so massive being built by ancient people with primitive tools? Baalbek, Lebanon. The Temple of Jupiter sits on a foundation made of stones weighing up to 1,650 tons. That's 3.3 million pounds. Modern cranes can lift maybe 200 tons. Local legend says giants built the foundation. Sacsayhuaman, Peru. Massive stone walls with blocks weighing over 200 tons, fitted together with zero gaps. The Inca people, when asked who built it, said they didn't, the giants did. Easter Island, the Moai statues, some weighing 82 tons. The Rapa Nui oral tradition says the statues were built to honor their ancestors. But who were their ancestors? The natives said the statues walked to their locations. Researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lippo suggest ropes and rocking motion. Some scholars propose log-rolling systems. But the last theory, the one locals believe, is spiritual power. What if the people who built these structures had knowledge or abilities far beyond what we attribute to ancient civilizations? This brings us to the hottest question of all. Brace yourself. You are about to hear some of the most controversial theories about the Nephilim. It will leave you questioning human origins and wondering if our DNA contains traces of something non-human. Let's backtrack to who the Nephilim were. As described in Genesis and the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim were hybrids, offspring of sons of God and human women. But the deeper researchers dig, the more questions emerge. How did beings this large exist? How did they achieve advanced knowledge? Were they truly the result of angelic-human hybridization? Little wonder the extraterrestrial hypothesis started gaining traction. The ancient astronaut theory. This theory suggests that extraterrestrials visited Earth thousands of years ago and interacted with early humans. Some researchers argue these weren't angels, but advanced beings from another world. Newsflash. This theory is no mere speculation. Ancient texts around the world describe similar events. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, celestial beings who descended from the heavens. The Mayans wrote of sky gods in the Popol Vuh. Hindu texts describe flying craft called Vimanas. If these accounts describe real visitors, could the Nephilim have been the result of genetic experimentation? Some theories suggest that if extraterrestrials visited Earth, they had one goal: to modify humanity. This could have occurred through genetic manipulation or interbreeding. In this era, scientists dismiss such ideas as pseudoscience. But what if this genetic intervention left traces? What if our DNA still carries evidence? Modern genetic mysteries. Scientists discovered that humans carry DNA from Neanderthals, and Denisovans proof that interbreeding between human species occurred. But there's also junk DNA, sections of our genetic code that scientists couldn't fully explain. Could this be remnant genetic material from an unknown source? Rh-negative blood. About 15% of humans have Rh-negative blood, which lacks a protein found in almost all other species. Where did it come from? Some researchers point to this as evidence of ancient hybridization. This is where the real debate began. It did not start with the fascinating biblical accounts of Nephilim or the Book of Enoch's detailed descriptions. Neither did mainstream scientists react when newspaper reports of giant skeletons were linked to ancient legends, or even when researchers proposed extraterrestrial involvement. The straw that broke the camel's back was the lack of physical evidence. All theories and propositions were tolerated as long as no one could produce verifiable giant remains. However, geological and anthropological findings became the core strength of skeptics. If giants truly existed, surely the Earth would not lie, would it? Mainstream science concluded, no skeletal evidence. Despite hundreds of newspaper reports, no giant skeleton has been preserved in a major museum for public examination. Every claimed discovery either lacks photographic evidence or the remains mysteriously disappeared. Misidentification theory. Skeptics argue that early archaeologists often misidentified large mammal bones as human remains. Mastodon bones, for example, can resemble oversized human bones. Exaggeration in reporting. 19th century journalism lacked modern fact-tracking. Stories were often sensationalized to sell papers. Biblical interpretation. Many theologians argue the Nephilim were simply tall humans, not supernatural giants. The sons of God could have been the lineage of Seth, not fallen angels. Lack of genetic evidence. Modern DNA studies show no evidence of non-human hybridization in human ancestry beyond Neanderthals and Denisovans. Then there is the question of the tablets, the bones. The problem is that no verified giant skeleton has ever been made available for independent scientific analysis. Without physical remains, the entire giant hypothesis is built on unverified historical claims and ancient texts. But it doesn't end here. But if giants never existed, why do so many cultures have these stories? Is there a rational explanation? Perhaps there is. Although mainstream science dismisses the Nephilim as myth, some researchers believe there could be an element of truth behind the legends. Theory 1. Giants were just tall humans. Gigantism is a real medical condition caused by excess growth hormone. Ancient populations may have had individuals reaching 7 to 8 feet tall. Over time, these unusually tall people became legendary giants. Theory 2. Misinterpreted texts. Some scholars believe Genesis 6 was metaphorical, not literal. The sons of God could represent powerful human rulers, and the Nephilim were simply their mighty warrior descendants. Theory 3. Cultural memory of megafauna. Early humans encountered massive Ice Age animals, mammoths, giant sloths, cave bears. Stories about these enormous creatures could have evolved into giant humanoid legends. Theory 4. Psychological archetype. Anthropologists suggest that the giant is a universal human archetype representing overwhelming forces, nature, enemies, or the unknown. These alternative explanations suggest that the Nephilim might not have been literal giants, but cultural symbols that evolved over millennia. Was the Nephilim really a race of giants that once ruled the earth? Do we carry genes from a possible hybrid civilization? To this day, scientists lack concrete answers. We do, too. The evidence is conflicting. On one hand, we have hundreds of historical reports, consistent global mythology, ancient texts like the Bible and the Book of Enoch, and structures that seem impossible for ancient humans to build. On the other hand, we have no verified skeletal remains, no conclusive DNA evidence, and scientific explanations for why the giant hypothesis doesn't hold up. So where does this leave us? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe there were unusually tall humans whose legends grew over time. Maybe ancient texts described real events but used symbolic language. Or maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary once existed and the evidence has been lost, destroyed, or hidden. What do you think about the Nephilim? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this investigation, leave us a like and subscribe to Forbidden Chronicles to be the first to get more videos exploring humanity's hidden past. Keep your minds open. And until we meet again,